Renowned Kenyan scholar Ali Alamin Mazrui is dead. Mazrui passed away Monday morning in Binghamton, New York, in the United States at the age of 81. At the time of his death, he was a professor at Binghamton University in New York. According to family members, Mazrui had been unwell and was undergoing treatment. He has written over 30 books and lectured in different universities worldwide. He once served as Chancellor of Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. He first rose to prominence as a critic of some of the accepted orthodoxies of African intellectuals in the 1960s and 1970s. He was a critic of all and strains that he described himself as a proponent of a unique ideology of African liberalism. His body will be flown back to Kenya for burial. Mazrui is survived by a wife and 6 children. Well, he is part of a documentary he did on exploitation of the continent of Africa by the West.
In a bid to correct a century of colonial neglect, rulers of independent Africa have tried a shortcut to a new industrial revolution. They have mortgaged their souls for capital-intensive projects, exposing themselves to Western sharks in search of a pound of flesh. The debts accumulate. While our ancient kings built palaces and pyramids, our modern presidents erect steel mills, hydroelectric dams, temples to the gods of modern technology. You know, we don't have to adopt Western solutions for African problems. But when we do adopt such solutions, like heavy industry, we should also adopt the logic that comes with that type of thing, the logic of rational calculation, of maximizing benefits, of minimizing costs. There are no two ways about it. To paraphrase a Western poet, Alexander Pope, a little modernity is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not the Western spring.
Now, the death of Professor Mazrui will be felt by the entire African continent based on the work and contribution that the late professor made in the region. On KTN's Morning Express show, Mombasa Senator Hassan Omar and City Lawyer Ambrose Weda remembered the late professor as a scholar whose works not only transformed the continent, but imparted knowledge to many.
He was a scholar who defined the parameters of African intellectualism, not without his share of criticisms from many people. His series, The Triple Heritage, his book was extraordinary. It was serialized in the BBC, giving the nexus of Africa between Africanism, Islam, democracy, and all these other issues in culture. So I think his contribution was great, and he will tell you one thing which is very inspirational. He did not start as a bright kid. He actually had to be pushed through school.
Professor has left a legacy that we Kenyans should learn, that at the end when you are called to be with the Maker, what legacy have you left? Yeah. I met Professor when I was in high school. Those days, 1987, 88, they used to have, he did a book called Read Lectures, very highly intellectual lectures that we used to read in high school as to feel bright and to feel big. And they used to have a debate himself, Professor Bethel Ogot, Professor Che, very intensive academic debate. And it was an inspiration to quite a number of us until I left history. But the legacy has left. It makes us feel very proud as Kenyans. Let you also outside there leave a legacy, not a legacy of robbery, stealing, looting the country, and spreading political hatred or terrorism. Leave a cool legacy like Professor.
Meanwhile, the family of the late Professor Mazrui are meeting in his Mombasa home to prepare for his burial. According to close relatives, the late professor had asked that his body be buried in Mombasa. When KTN visited his home, close family members were in prayers and revealed that plans will involve bringing the body back from the US. Exact dates of the burial will be communicated later.
اللهم اجعل قبره روضة من رياض الجنة اللهم اجمعه مع الذين أنعمت عليهم من النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين. Hivi sasa mawasiliano yanaendelea ili kuhakikisha ya kuwa analetwa katika wakati wa karibu unawezekana. Lakini kama mnavyojua Amerika ni mbali na kesho tunasikia itakuwa kule ni public holiday. Kwa hivyo pengine mipango itaanza Jumatano kutengezwa ili aweze kufika hapa kwa wakati wa karibu inavyowezekana.
Moving on, 2 police officers were Monday charged with the murder of 14-year-old schoolgirl Kwekwe Mwandaze. Inspector Veronica Gitahi and Police Constable Isam Z denied the charge when they appeared before Mombasa High Court Judge Maureen Odero. While they were each freed on a bond of 500,000 shillings, the 2 officers were brought to court after the judge issued summons last week. Director of Public Prosecutions Keriako Tobiko had directed the 2 be charged with the killing of the schoolgirl in Kwale County. The DPP gave the orders following separate investigations conducted by the Directorate of Criminal Investigations and the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. Kwekwe was shot dead at 2 a.m. on August 21st this year during an incident in which 8 police officers stormed her family's home at Mawewu village in Kinango.
5 million and more bond. This one he did not ask.
In normal circumstances, when it's murder cases, there has to be a review before bond terms are issued. In this case, we can see that it was direct. The proper procedure was not followed. Secondly, we are very surprised at the accused persons who are almost celebrating and shaking hands in court after the bond terms were announced. We did not see any remorse. We did not see any regrets. If anything, they were shaking hands and smiling as they were leaving.
Right, let's now have our first conversation of the bulletin this afternoon. And joining me in studio is Dr. Shem Ochwodo from the Kenya Diaspora Alliance, and we'll be speaking about diaspora voting. Thank you very much for joining us on Newsdesk.
Thank you, Betty.
All right, now talking about diaspora voting, Kenyans living abroad apparently feel alienated from voting in our elections. Is that a rightful judgment?
Before I comment on that, permit me to express on behalf of the Kenya Diaspora Alliance, which is a federation of diaspora organizations, and generally the diaspora community, for the passing on of the doyen of the academic world, Professor Ali Mazrui. We're very saddened. It's just last night we had a teleconference, global teleconference, and we're planning a major convention end of year, December 19th, 20th. And Professor Mazrui was to be one of our keynote speakers. So we're very sad, but we're happy to celebrate the life that God gave us with him.
Exactly.
Having said that, the aspect of diaspora voting, and this is something that's passionate to most diaspora you talk to, and by diaspora in our definition, we're not just talking of Kenyans who live outside the country, although that's the constitutional definition, but we also mean mixed families, as well as returnees. But in terms of voting, we are talking of Kenyans ordinarily non-resident in Kenya. This has been an issue concerning diaspora in 2010 during the referendum. Diaspora actually were compelled to go to court so that they could vote. Unfortunately, court ruled just 2 weeks before that while they sympathized, diaspora needed to vote, it wasn't practical with only 2 weeks. But court directed IIEC, Interim Independent Electoral Commission at the time, the precursor to IEBC, to make arrangements for diaspora to vote in all subsequent elections and referenda. Unfortunately, this was not to be. So in 2012, we went back again to court out of no desire and as a last resort. High Court then ruled against us, unfortunately. But not to give up, diaspora went to the Court of Appeal. Very fortunately, the Court of Appeal about 2 months ago ruled in our favor that diaspora be facilitated to vote in all elections, not just presidential. Unfortunately, IEBC has proceeded to the Supreme Court
and diaspora are prepared to be with them there. But it's very unfortunate because the executive and the legislature, His Excellency the President, is on record, has been to the diaspora and has told them, has reassured them they're going to vote in 2017.
Yes.
The legislature, the Speaker of the Assembly of Parliament, of National Assembly, of the Senate, are equally on record saying, what bills do you require us to amend so that diaspora can vote? So we're really wondering whose time IBC is marking, but we don't think that it's right for them to keep us in court to fight for our inalienable rights. It's like a triple injury. First, they're using our resources. We pay taxes. They're using to take us to court to deny us our inalienable rights. Secondly, this God-given rights, which we should have. And thirdly, they are compelling diaspora to dig deeper into their pockets to pay legal fees so that they can defend themselves. We don't think this is right, but we are hoping that fairness will prevail at the end of the day. And we thank a court of appeal for having deemed it right for diaspora to vote.
All right. So are we saying that in 2017 they will be able to vote, or what strides have you made to ensure that this happens?
We are hoping this will happen. As diaspora, we've made some preparatory measures because we did recognize IBC in earlier years said it's going to be costly, it's not going to be practical. But as Kenya Diaspora Alliance, we've established a technical team that has created a web portal, a diaspora database, ivote.net. So we already have about 2,000 diaspora sign up, but it hasn't been launched yet. Our target is by first quarter of next year have about 100,000 diaspora signed up, so that when the time comes, if IBC says, where do we get this diaspora? We have ready numbers for them. Allow me also, Betty, to disabuse a fact. Some people claim that diaspora in East Africa voted in the last elections. Personally, I live in Juba, South Sudan, but I was compelled to come to Nairobi, go to Kampala, and then register, and then go back to Juba, and then come back and then go to Kampala to vote. I wasn't able to vote in the process. But our premise is that even when I was in Kampala, more than 99% of eligible Kenyans who came to the embassy to register were turned away, because IBC came up with some rather interesting rule that you couldn't register unless you had a regular passport. Most people who go to the nearby stations, we call them Ongata Rongai diaspora, don't usually have passports regular. So it was a fallacy. That's why barely 1% did register and vote outside the country.
All right. Dr. Shemochodo, thank you very much for joining us on that short conversation, but all the best with that.
Thank you very much.
Right, let's take a short commercial break. We'll be back with more news shortly.
And welcome back to KTN Newsdesk. I'm Michael Karanja. Now, there has been this theory that cash is one day going to become an enemy. And just to help us dispel or get more understanding about having a cash-light economy, I'm joined in studio by Dennis Njah, who's the head of channels at KCB. Cash is king, right or wrong?
Well, it is king, certainly. The question is the format in which it takes. And cash can be the notes, can be the coins. But I think we're seeing a transition, moving away from the notes, moving away from the cash into the format that is electronic. And I think it is desirable that this economy gets to move away from the traditional way of doing business where cash and coins changed hands, and we move on to a more electronic value. Actually, Mike, I would say this, that the value of money is not in the notes or in the coins. It's actually in the value that we get to exchange.
It's when you do more transactions and money is circulating in the economy.
Absolutely. And I would say that then, even for an economy, it's extremely expensive to print cash. That's one. And of course, we know the vices that have also come along with trading with cash in its current format. And so what we're seeing is that then this country is right at the threshold of a takeoff that will then get to see us then moving away, using less of cash and more of it in more electronic formats. Look at transit, for example. And I think there's already a directive by NTSA that is currently being driven that then public transport will be paid for in a cashless format. If you look at the government, of course, as one of the major service providers, then they're also gravitating towards a position, then we will see more of a cashless being utilized. If you look at this country, I think, and a report was given the other day about this country becoming a more middle-income country. One of the things that we know about the attributes of that kind of a country is that then people use less of cash and use more of an electronic format. And so I think Kenya is right at that point where we're almost going to see a tipping point and it's making that journey towards that direction.
If I was just to ask you, we've seen in the West, there's a lot of card-based kind of payments. In Kenya and other African countries, or perhaps just Kenya, we're more focused on mobile money transfer services, where I think is what people have become more accustomed to. So, pros and cons of each. Where should we focus more on cards, or should we just continue with something that has worked in Kenya's favor in terms of money transfer?
I think mobile has introduced us to a cashless economy, and I think it has played its role. And I think we must give credit to mobile banking, because then it has demystified the whole question of cash versus cashless. And so I think that was a first important step in that direction. And what are we likely going to see? We are going to continue seeing use of mobile banking continue to grow, but then other frontiers that will then begin to open in a more elaborate way is things to do with internet banking, for example. We're going to see card business being utilized. If you look at Kenya, for example, we are under a mandate of EMV, and one of the reasons why Kenyans have shied away in the past from using cards was the whole question of security of their own transactions. But then as a country, we have moved on to an EMV mandate, which then indicates that then security around card transactions is getting higher. Now, as that gets higher, then what we're likely going to see is that a higher uptick of that particular mode of utilization of...
But if it's us to ask, government seems to be on this track for cashless payments with the national payments kind of portal. But when we look at it, how do we then get that to be bought in by consumers? Because we've already seen with things like Nairobi City Council, and they tried to do mobile payments for things like even basic things like ticketing. There was still that disconnect about how it's used. So now, how do we get that education from people who are offering these services to the people end users of the service?
I think one, education must be invested in, and we've got to invest in teaching the public that then this is now an option that is available, and indeed it is better for you on more ways than one. I think, figure yourself, Mike, if you went to a mall today, after doing all your shopping, you're going to have to carry too many paper bags, and at some point you're at a loss. Do I first take this to the car? Do I first pay for parking? Or exactly what do I do? And if there was an easier way to do this, and it would then save you a lot of the inconvenience that comes along with it. Cashless, saves us a lot of time. Cashless saves us a lot of money. It is even safer for us. And of course, medics also tell us that then there are hygiene issues that come along also with handling a lot of cash.
Right. Dennis, if you just cut you short, when do we see when we're going to go purely cashless? Is still cash going to remain king?
I don't think we're going to do completely cashless. Even very developed economies have not quite gotten to the point of cashless. I would actually look at us going cash light, so that then we reduce the usage of cash and replace that with electronic formats of being able to use cash. So I think the journey will be from cash where we are today to cash light. And hopefully someday we will see where the cashless is going to get there. But of course, I know that even Western countries are not there yet.
All right. Thank you very much, Dennis.
Most welcome. Thank you.
That has been Dennis Jao, head of channels at KCB, just telling us about where we are headed as a country in terms of cash-light economy, where cash is no longer king, but we can see different forms of payment channels. And I'll hand you over back to Betty.
And that's where we wind up this edition of KTN Newsdesk. Thank you very much for watching. See you again tomorrow. I'm Betty Kialo.